The house that whispers. The first thing they smelled was iron. Sheriff Amos Walker didn't notice the silence of the hollow until they were halfway up the path. Even the cicadas had gone mute, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. His boots sank into black soil as slick as oil. The others, 2 deputies and a county nurse clutching her bag like a shield, kept glancing at the tree line. The pines stood unnaturally still despite the rising wind. When Walker's flashlight caught the house through the fog, every man in the group stopped walking. The house seemed wrong. It wasn't just the rot, though there was plenty of that. The roof sagged like a broken spine. The porch slumped on one corner as if trying to crawl away. It was the feeling that the building was watching them. As if the windows weren't boarded up at all but blinked when the light hit them. "Lord have mercy," whispered the nurse. The deputy beside her muttered, "He kept 2 sisters in there." 20 years. Walker's jaw tightened. Let's make sure they're still human. He didn't mean it as a joke. And none of them laughed. The Blackridge Hollow. The house squatted at the bottom of Blackridge Hollow like a tick buried in the skin of the earth. Nobody in town remembered when it was built. The Blackridge family had owned the surrounding 40 acres since the 1880s, back when the railroad barons still carved up the hills. Most folks assumed the place was abandoned. No power lines ran to it. No road led there, just an overgrown logging trail choked with kudzu and briars. The tax assessor had stopped coming decades ago, and yet, smoke had been seen curling from its chimney in winter, lights flickering in the attic some nights. A gaunt figure glimpsed on the ridge, vanishing when hailed. People had whispered for years about Ezekiel Blackridge, that he'd come back from the war different, that he'd buried his parents and then stopped coming to town, that he'd sealed his sisters inside that house like valuables in a tomb. But mountain folk don't go looking for trouble. Not until trouble screams loud enough to be heard 3 hollows over. It screamed on a Tuesday night in August, 1959. The cry, the first call, came from a moonshiner named Caleb Rusk. Said he was running his still by the creek when he heard what he swore was a bobcat screaming. Except bobcats don't cry words. "She was hollerin' for Jesus," Caleb stammered, eyes wide. "Hollerin' help me like her soul was on fire." By morning, 2 more hunters reported the same. A woman's voice echoing off the ridges, thin as paper and just as torn. Sheriff Walker organized a search party. They found nothing, just claw marks on the inside of an old storm door and a bloody ribbon snagged on a rusted nail. The mountain swallowed its secrets, again, until tonight. Into the maw Walker reached the sagging porch and pressed his palm to the door. Cold. Too cold for August. His breath fogged the air as though the house exhaled winter. "Kick it," he said. Deputy Price put his shoulder to the door. It groaned like something waking up. The stench rolled out, coppery, sour, and faintly sweet. Nurse Abernathy gagged into her sleeve. Inside, the dark had weight. The beam of Walker's flashlight trembled as he swept it across the room. Furniture coated in a thick, furry layer of mold. Wallpaper bubbling off the walls like blistered skin. A cradle in the corner rocking gently, though the air was still. "Do you hear that?" Abernathy whispered. Walker paused. Beneath the creaking timbers came a faint rhythmic sound, too steady to be the house settling. Breathing, coming from below. The descent. They found the trapdoor under a rug that had once been floral, but now was the color of old teeth. The wood beneath their boots trembled as if something below was shifting its weight. "Basement," said Walker. "No basements. Out here," muttered Price. "Water, table's too high." "Then what the hell is it?" Walker said, and pulled the hatch. A puff of cold air hissed up like the house sighing in relief. The smell hit harder, sweet rot over raw meat. Abernathy fumbled her flashlight, caught it just before it clattered down the ladder. Walker went first. The rungs were slick with something he didn't want to think about. The air grew colder as he descended, like each rung took him a year further back in time. The light cut through dust motes the size of snowflakes. The smell of iron was overwhelming now, metallic and primal. When his boots hit dirt, he realized the sound had stopped. No more breathing, no sound at all. As though everything was holding perfectly still, waiting. The wall of eyes the others clambered down behind him, their lights jittering across rough stone walls. That's when they saw them. At first, Walker thought they were mirrors, dozens of little pale reflections winking back in the dark. Then one blinked, eyes, dozens of them, wide and glassy, catching the light like animal eyes at night. Bodies huddled in the shadows. Small, shrunken things with limbs too thin and skin so pale it was almost translucent. Hair-matted ribs showing through like cage slats. Children, 16 of them, and behind them, at the far end of the cellar, something moved. Something tall. It rose from a chair with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who has been waiting. Walker's flashlight froze on a face half swallowed by a beard, eyes as pale as candle wax, and a smile carved too wide across his gaunt cheeks. "Welcome home," said Ezekiel Blackridge. And then, before any of them could speak, the children began to sing. The gospel according to Ezekiel, the song was wrong. Not out of tune, worse, it was in a key that didn't belong to this century. Some droning mountain hymn that crawled up Sheriff Walker's spine like cold water. The voices weren't in harmony either, half whispers, half broken wails. When the children finally fell silent, Ezekiel Blackridge stepped forward until the light caught him full in the face. His skin looked almost carved, every bone sharp enough to cut. His voice was soft yet carried like a sermon. "You trespassers came too late," he said. "The work is done. The seed is planted, and it will grow whether you watch or not." Ezekiel's kingdom, Ezekiel Blackridge, had been a name from the county's past, a ghost story told around winter stoves. The Blackridge family once owned half the hollow, back before the mines poisoned the creek and the rail line pulled out. The war took the last of their men except Ezekiel. He came home with a limp, a chest full of medals, and a stare that made dogs whimper. Instead of rejoining the world, he built his own. Neighbors noticed the changes slowly. First, his trips to town stopped. Then his sisters vanished from the church rolls. Ezekiel fenced off the old property line, posted warnings about trespassers, and began hauling lumber into the woods by wagon. One autumn, smoke started rising from the chimneys again. Not the thin gray of a cooking fire, but thick black columns that smelled of boiled meat. Rendering hogs, people said, preparing for winter. But nobody ever saw hogs. The doctrine of purity Ezekiel did not just wall off his sisters. He remade them. Old diaries found years later revealed that he'd begun holding prayer meetings in the parlor, hours-long sessions where he read from a strange leather-bound book that was part Bible, part breeding manual, part manifesto. The doctrine was simple. God's chosen people had strayed from the blood of their forebears. It was Ezekiel's holy duty to restore it. His sisters, Martha and Lydia, were not merely kin. They were vessels for what he called the restoration. He kept charts like a farmer, tracking their cycles, marking births and deaths with equal devotion. Each new child was a step toward a perfect generation. When one was born deformed, Ezekiel fasted for days, then preached longer and harder about purging the weak. And the sisters obeyed. At first, because fear is a powerful thing. Later, because fear became faith. The sheriff's dilemma. In the basement, the children crouched together like a single organism. Some clutched at one another with spider-thin fingers. One little girl had hair as white as snow and eyes the color of milk. She hissed when Walker's light passed over her. "Good God," muttered Deputy Price. "Don't you take his name in vain down here." Ezekiel said almost lazily. "This is consecrated ground." Walker raised his rifle. "You're coming with us," Ezekiel smiled. "You think this ends with me?" The children began to stir, whispering to one another in a language that was almost English but not quite, a dialect born in darkness. Their words were soft, but their intent was not, because then Walker realized they weren't whispering to one another. They were whispering about them. The stories. They tell Ezekiel turned to the children and nodded once, like a conductor cueing his choir, one by one. They began reciting, not prayers and stories. They spoke of a man who could heal wounds with his spit, of a blood king who would raise an army from the mountains, of a day when outsiders would come and be fed to the earth. Each child spoke in turn, their voices weaving together until the room felt thick with prophecy. When the last child finished, Ezekiel turned back to Walker. "Now you understand," he said softly. "You are not here to save anyone. You are here to fulfill the prophecy." And from somewhere deeper in the dark, something heavy began to move. Something below. The sound came from under the floor itself. A dragging, scraping thud like something enormous waking up. Deputy Price swung his light to the far wall and froze. A second door, Not a hatch like the one they came through, but a stone slab set into the foundation, sealed with rusted iron latches. The thudding came again, louder this time, and the slab trembled. Several of the children began to smile. Wide, too wide. Ezekiel spread his arms like a preacher welcoming an altar call. "The last-born is ready," he said, "and he's hungry." The slab shifted another inch. And then it began to open. The last-born. The slab screamed as it moved. Stone shrieked on stone, a deep grinding howl that made the children cover their ears and smile at the same time. Cold air rushed out from the widening crack, sharp as dry ice, tasting of copper and something older than death. Sheriff Walker gritted his teeth as every instinct in his body tried to drag him up the ladder and out into the forgiving night. Instead, he leveled his rifle at the shifting door. "Stay back," he barked. Ezekiel only laughed, a low, cracked sound like wind through a coffin. "You don't command in this house," he said. "You enter it." And the door yawned wide. The chamber beneath beyond the stone slab was a tunnel carved straight through bedrock, so narrow that Walker's shoulders scraped the sides. The floor sloped downward, slick with something black that gleamed like oil in the flashlight beams. The deeper they went, the warmer the air grew. Not the warmth of life, but the damp, fetid heat of decay wrapped in blankets. The tunnel opened into a cavern that wasn't supposed to exist. A perfect dome of stone streaked with iron veins like frozen lightning. In the center stood a crib, or what had once been a crib. The wood had been carved and reshaped into a jagged crown of splinters around a mound of filthy blankets. They shifted as if something beneath them was breathing. Deputy Price whispered, "God help us." "Not down here," Ezekiel murmured. Then the blankets moved, the thing they raised. What uncurled from the crib was not precisely human. It was small, the size of a toddler, but its limbs were too long, jointed wrong, like a spider trying to impersonate a child. Skin so pale it seemed translucent, threaded with dark veins that pulsed visibly. The head was too large, the face too smooth. Only the faint impressions of eyes and mouth like features pressed into wax. And yet it looked at them, not with eyes, but with something deeper, as if their minds were being thumbed through like books. The children knelt, whispering, "Last-born." "Last-born." In perfect unison, Ezekiel sank to his knees. "My masterpiece," he breathed. Walker's stomach heaved. "That's not a child," Ezekiel smiled. "No, it's the end of children." Minds like clay, the creature tilted its bulbous head. Walker's vision flickered. For a moment, he wasn't in the cavern anymore. He was 7 years old, standing in his father's barn while a noose swung gently from a rafter. He smelled hay, sweat, the sour tang of whiskey on his father's breath as the man whispered, "Do it. End this line before it poisons another generation." Then the smell snapped back to rot and stone and the thing in the crib. Price was sobbing, clutching his temple. Nurse Abernathy's lips were moving soundlessly. It was inside them. The thing wasn't speaking. It was rewriting. Dipping its pale fingers into their memories, their shame, their private grief, kneading their minds like dough. Walker bellowed and fired. The crack of the rifle exploded in the enclosed chamber like thunder. The bullet never touched it. The quiet blink. The shot stopped in midair. Literally. The bullet hung 3 feet from the creature's chest, spinning lazily like a toy on a string. Walker blinked. Time had thickened around the thing like syrup. The bullet turned to dust. Ezekiel rose behind it, eyes fever-bright. "You see now," he said, voice trembling with reverence. "He will unmake your world and make it pure. He carries not our flaws, but our memories. He is the future stripped of sin." The creature reached out a hand, or something like a hand, thin and translucent as a jellyfish's bell. The cavern lights dimmed. Walker's thoughts frayed like old rope. Price screamed. Then silence. Collapse. Walker woke on the cavern floor. His flashlight lay shattered beside him, casting only the faintest glow. The crib was empty, so was the chamber. No Ezekiel. No children. Just an echoing hum from the tunnel, low and hungry, like the sound a bear makes before charging. He staggered upright, mind sloshing like a broken compass. The stone slab door at the far end was closing, grinding shut from the other side. They were leaving him, locking him in the dark. And as the last sliver of light vanished, something wet dragged across his boot, slow, deliberate, and very much alive. The hollow between worlds, the dark, wasn't empty. It breathed. Sheriff Walker pressed his back to the cold stone, every muscle locked. The tunnel beyond the sealed slab was silent now, but he could feel it, something pacing just beyond the edge of sound, its presence brushing his thoughts like cold fingers. He gripped his rifle though the stock was slick with his own sweat. His mind kept slipping sideways, memories bleeding through the cracks like water through rot. The first deer he ever shot. The look in its eyes. His father's voice saying, "Don't flinch while it dies." Walker whispered to himself. This isn't real, but the stone under his boots shifted, and the cavern exhaled. The bones of the house light came back in fits and spasms, flashes of lantern glow, then blackness again. Walker followed the tunnel upward, ribs aching, boots slipping on wet stone. The air grew warmer, thicker, carrying the stench of mildew and iron. He surfaced in a crawlspace behind the basement wall, a maze of beams and crumbling brick. Rats watched him from ledges, silent as sentries. Through cracks in the boards he saw the basement, empty now. The children, the nurse, the deputies, gone as if they'd been scraped off the face of the earth. But the house was changing. The angles were wrong. The cellar door that had led up to the kitchen now opened into a hallway lined with black, oil-soaked wallpaper that pulsed as if something beneath it had a heartbeat. The Blackridge house was rearranging itself, like a body flexing. Ghosts in the grain walker stepped into the hallway. The floorboards moaned, not with weight but with words. His name whispered from beneath his boots. Amos. Amos. Every picture frame held his childhood face, his own eyes staring back at him, younger, bloodier. In one he was 7 and holding his father's belt. In another 12 and standing over a dead hound with a shovel. They're not memories, he told himself. They're bait. Something laughed from the attic. High, delighted, and utterly inhuman. He started up the stairs. The banister writhed like a nest of pale roots under his hand. His own reflection in the cracked stairwell mirror grinned without him. Halfway up, he smelled roses, sharp and out of place. That was when he realized the smell was coming from inside his mouth. The room with too many doors. At the top of the stairs. The attic was gone. In its place stretched a circular room, walls lined with identical doors. Each door bore his name. One whispered, Sheriff Walker. Another, Little Amos. Another, the boy who didn't cut the rope. The air buzzed with static. Like a radio half-tuned, something moved beneath the floorboards, the faint scuttle of too many limbs. And then the doors began to open. Behind the first, his father, hanging from the barn rafter, grinning through broken teeth. Behind the second, Deputy Price, hollow-eyed, mouth sewn shut with hair. Behind the third, the last-born perched like a spider, head lolling, veins glowing faintly blue. Its mouth wasn't shaped for words, but the voice bloomed inside his skull anyway. We are not what comes after you. We are what comes instead. The bloodroot gospel, the room convulsed. Floorboards split. Red roots erupted from the cracks, slick and pulsing, wrapping around Walker's legs. He hacked at them with his knife. They bled but didn't loosen. Ezekiel's voice rose from nowhere and everywhere, chanting like a preacher at a tent revival. From rot comes bloom. From ruin comes rain. The seed will eat the tree. The child will eat the man. Walker roared and fired wildly. Bullets ricocheted like hornets. The last-born moved between them like smoke, flickering. Here, then gone. The roots yanked Walker down through the floor as if the house had swallowed him whole. For a moment there was only red darkness, rushing past like the inside of a vein, and then he slammed into stone. The heart of the hollow, he was in another chamber, spherical, walls slick and glistening as if carved from meat. In its center stood a structure grown from fused ribs, forming a crude throne. Ezekiel sat upon it. His skin was translucent now, veins glowing faintly, eyes blank and milky. The children clustered around him silent, heads tilted at the same unnatural angle. The last-born crouched at his feet like a pet spider. Ezekiel smiled. A cracked thing, stretching too far. You see? He whispered. Even the house knows who its blood belongs to. The walls began to pulse in time with his voice, and then they opened their eyes. The house that ate time. The walls blinked. Dozens of lidless eyes bulged from the glistening stone, pale irises tracking Walker like hunting owls. They pulsed with the house's heartbeat, slow, seismic, each thump rattling his teeth. Ezekiel leaned forward on his rib throne, his voice a dry rustle. "Every house has a heart, Sheriff. You just have to feed it long enough for it to wake." The eyes blinked again, not together but in waves like ripples on a pond. Behind them, something vast shifted in the dark, straining against the shape of reality like a snake outgrowing its skin. The choir of broken mouths, the children rose in perfect unison. Their mouths opened. Not just their lips, and their faces split, jaws unhinging like cracked porcelain. Sound poured out. Not screaming, not words, but a chorus of warped lullabies and wet gurgling like every memory Walker ever wanted to forget played backward at once. The sound bypassed his ears. It slithered straight into his skull. His vision fractured. He saw the children as they were and as they might have been. Bright-eyed kids on bicycles clutching schoolbooks. Then back to spider-limbed wraiths whispering his sins. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The last-born glided toward him, its translucent skin glowing faintly like moonlit jelly. "You are hollow," it breathed into his thoughts. "You can be filled." The seed had touched his chest. No impact, just a sensation like warm water seeping through stone. His heartbeat stuttered. Something moved inside his ribs. Walker tore open his shirt. His sternum was bulging, flexing as if something inside were pushing back. Thin red roots spiderwebbed beneath his skin, pulsing to the house's rhythm. Ezekiel's grin split his face like a wound. "The house has chosen you." "No," Walker rasped. "Yes," Ezekiel hissed, rising, arms spread like a prophet. "You'll carry the seed. You'll walk back into the world wearing their badge, their skin, and plant us in every town you touch. The hollow will spread through your words, your laws, your mercy." Walker screamed, not in fear but rage. The sound cracked the air. The children staggered. For the first time, Ezekiel flinched. The revolt of memory Walker slammed his forehead into the last-born. It felt like striking warm glass. The creature reeled. The spell faltered, enough for him to snatch the jagged shard of rib from Ezekiel's throne. Images roared up in his mind. His father's laugh, the smell of pine tar, his mother humming while mending his shirt. Real memories uncorrupted. The seed recoiled. The house screamed. A sound like mountains splitting. Walker drove the rib shard into his own chest. White fire shot through his veins. The red roots shriveled to ash. The eyes in the walls slammed shut, oozing black tears. Ezekiel shrieked, "You fool!" But Walker was already moving, barreling through the collapsing chamber as the throne crumbled behind him. The house dies screaming. He burst into the hallway above. The house was convulsing, walls bending, floors buckling like waves. Doors shrieked as they twisted into spirals. The children howled in unison, their voices melting into the sound of breaking glass. One by one they turned to dust, scattering like moth wings in a furnace blast. Walker stumbled toward the front door as the house folded in on itself. Each step took years off the place, wood crumbling to gray pulp, wallpaper sloughing like dead skin. Behind him, Ezekiel's scream chased him up the collapsing stairwell. "You were supposed to spread me!" Walker dove through the doorway as the house imploded, timbers snapping inward like ribs around a heart. A shockwave of hot wind flung him into the weeds. When he looked back, the Blackridge house was gone, just a circle of black earth, and a single pale seed pulsing where the heart had been. A pulse that isn't his. Walker lay on his back, chest heaving. His shirt was scorched around the hole he'd stabbed, yet the skin beneath was unmarked. His heartbeat steadied, then stuttered, then synchronized to something beneath the soil. Thump, thump. The seed twitched in the dirt, and Walker felt it. Smile. The roots beneath us, the Blackridge house never rebuilt itself. By the time the county sent crews to investigate, all they found was a black crater choked with weeds that grew in spirals and bled red sap when cut. The official report called it sinkhole collapse due to structural decay. Unofficially, the men who went down there didn't talk about what they saw, not in public, not even to their wives. The sheriff who came back, wrong sheriff. Amos Walker limped out of the hollow 3 days later. His boots were shredded. His badge was gone. His eyes weren't, not the same anyway. Once they'd been pale blue, quick and sharp. Now they were murky, like river water stirred with something oily beneath. He claimed he remembered nothing, said the house fell on him, said the children and deputies must have been crushed. Search teams found no remains. The townsfolk called it a miracle. Walker called it penance. He kept working, quiet, tireless, never slept much, never ate much. He started wearing gloves even in summer, and people who shook his hand said his palm felt warm, like living wood. The quiet bloom weeds started spreading from the crater, at first just along the creek, red-veined vines that grew twice as fast as kudzu and killed everything they touched. When cut, they bled a black fluid that smelled faintly of roses. Livestock that grazed near them birthed strange, slick-skinned calves with milky eyes. Birds avoided the area entirely. Dogs howled if taken within a mile. Walker posted warning signs: contaminated soil, no trespassing. The signs rotted in days, the seed inside by spring. Walker was coughing up petals, tiny pale things, translucent with veins that pulsed faintly. He burned them in the sheriff's stove and locked the ashes in a drawer. His heartbeat no longer matched his pulse. At night, he dreamt of corridors lined with doors bearing his name. Behind each one he saw the children waiting, not twisted or broken now, perfect, smiling, holding hands, and the last-born standing behind them like a shadow made of moonlight, whispering, "You are the first garden. We are only waiting for rain, a sheriff's legacy in June." Walker resigned. No warning, no reason. Packed a single bag, locked his house, walked into the hills. They never found him. But the vines kept spreading. A year later, the hollow was gone, swallowed under a carpet of pale growth that hummed faintly at night. Birds won't fly over it. Deer won't enter it. And if you stand on the ridge on a still evening, you can hear something moving far below the earth, something shifting, like a heart flexing in its sleep. The last twist today, the locals call it the Red Hollow. Hikers vanish there sometimes. Their phones go dead before the GPS drops off. Search teams find only their boots, neatly placed side by side at the edge of the growth. But sometimes, months later, those same hikers reappear in nearby towns, clean, smiling, and strangely quiet. They never remember where they went. They all have the same cloudy eyes. They all hum the same broken lullaby when they think no one is listening. And every one of them, without fail, has a faint red vine-shaped scar creeping up their chest from where their heart should be. The seed grew. It always does. And if you ever find yourself walking the old ridge road near midnight, and you smell roses where there shouldn't be any, run, because Ezekiel was right about one thing. You can't stop the bloodline. You can only hope it hasn't already chosen you.